It goes. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for convenient truth telling and myth busting. It's another of our All Things Africa edition. We're continuing to explore the North African region, and today we are exploring Algeria. Hold up one moment, folks. I think I got my yes. Algeria. We are exploring Algeria, and who better to teach us about this African nation or any African country than our returning champion, history teacher, and our historical guide, Abayomi Azikiwe of Pan African Newswire and frequent contributor to Black Agenda Reports. Abayomi, as everyone should know, is an independent journalist and historian and anti-imperialist campaigner and all-round leftist. And as always, before we start, just a reminder to our audience to please share widely all of One Plus One's content, past and present episodes, our playlists, and help us overcome the far-right algorithms and the dominant monopoly Western corporate state media and pseudo-leftist websites have in the social media world by sharing our content. Share us across social media and email, and please donate if you can to One Plus One at our PayPal. And if people are having trouble and would prefer an alternative form to donate, then please get in touch with me at Youri@gmail. And sometimes Facebook blocks my ability to share One Plus One. So again, please share widely. It helps the show immensely, and it's our only way of overcoming the pro-capitalist, pro-imperialist, sexist, heteronormative, racist media. And now on to the topic at hand. So Abayomi, Algeria. We finally come to Algeria. We've been hearing about we've been hearing about Algeria. It's been a recurring theme as we've been exploring all across the continent, and now this entire episode is finally dedicated to Algeria. So, as always, tell us, what was Algeria like before French colonization? How did it become a French colony? And what were the conditions of the people like? Because I understand Algeria, like Haiti, was a particularly brutal colony a particularly brutal subject of French colonization. And France practiced settler colonialism in Algeria, of course, with French characteristics. So do explain to us, the uniquely cruel conditions Algeria endured under French rule. But first, of course, tell us, what was Algeria like before it became a French colony, and the conditions. Yeah, go right ahead.
The area that is today known as Algeria has a long, extremely extensive history. There have been artifacts and fossils found in the Northwest Africa region, the so-called Maghreb, where Algeria is located. These are artifacts involving tools and human remains go back, some say, as long as 2.4 million years. So these are one of the oldest known human settlements and civilizations throughout the entire process of human history. And they were documented as being there as early as 2.4 million years ago. And then there were other settlements that have been discovered that are of a more recent duration, but we're still talking about in the millions of years. And then, of course, Algeria had its own indigenous ethnic groups and cultures that merged over the millenniums to be considered one of the early so-called Berber civilized groupings. Now, who are the Berbers? We talked about this before. They are people who have been in the Northwest Africa region for thousands of years, various tribes and ethnic groups that merged to develop their own languages and distinctive cultures. This predates the involvement of many other European as well as Arab groupings that came in centuries later. Also, there was the intervention of the Roman Empire, which had Algiers and other surrounding areas as major outposts of the Roman Empire. This took place even prior to the Christian era, extending beyond the Christian era. And also the Algerians were never a submissive people. Even under Berber control, there were recurrent rebellions that took place. During the period around the early part of the so-called Christian era, there was the rise of the Empire of Carthage, which was heavily Berber-oriented. And they fought many battles against the Roman Empire, the so-called Punic Wars that took place during that particular time period. At one point, they had dominated Rome. At other points, the Romans were able to retaliate and take over other areas, retake areas in Northwest Africa. This went on up until the period of the intervention of these so-called Vandals. These were Germanic people who extended beyond what is today Germany and Poland. They began to intervene in Northwest Africa, and their intervention created wars between the Roman-dominated empires and civilizations and the Vandals and the Berbers. Of course, at one point, they resisted the Roman Empire. At other points, some of them had participated in the Roman conquest. Same situation with Carthage as well. So it went on for many, many thousands of years. Then there was the intervention of the Muslims, Arabs from West Asia, from Southern Arabia. There were several waves that came, the first being in the 7th century. Those were fought by the Berbers. Some of the Berbers rejected Islam. Others became Islamized, but at the same time maintained their distinctive culture. And then there was another wave in the 11th century that came from West Asia as well. These included various Arab tribes and dynasties, along with other groupings as well that came into the Northwest Africa region. Same situation occurred. Berbers, some adopted Islam, others resisted Islam. Even those who accepted Islam, many of whom maintained their indigenous culture as well. And then, of course, we saw, beginning around the 8th century, the intervention of North African groupings, such as the Almohads and the Almoravids, which went into the Iberian Peninsula and took control of large areas of territory there. They maintained control up until about the latter part of the 15th century. There were challenges, of course, the Battle of Grenada, then, of course, the development of the Kingdom of Castile, which was an area in modern-day Spain, which attempted to retaliate against the Muslim civilizations that had come in and taken over control of many areas of the Iberian Peninsula. Of course, the initial European modern day, what I would consider modern European intervention over the last 600 years occurred by the Spanish in retaliation for the Muslim and so-called Moor intervention and dominance between the 8th and the 15th century, returned and attempted to destroy all the Islamic dominated civilizations in North Africa. And they took over various areas, islands and other outposts in the beginning around the conclusion of the 15th century. Now, a lot of this had to do with the role of the so-called Barbary pirates. Well, who were the Barbary pirates? They were ostensibly people who had their origins among the Ottoman Turks, who came into the area around the 16th century. But prior to that, they were involved in hijacking ships and also involved in slavery of Europeans along the Mediterranean coast, both in Southern Europe as well as in North Africa. So there was a strong effort on the part of the conquistas, the so-called Christian crusaders, who wanted to rid the Iberian Peninsula of the Muslims who had been there for several centuries. And they attempted to retaliate and take control of areas in North Africa. And this is what happened beginning in the early 16th century. Also, the Portuguese made an attempt in the early 16th century as well to take control of areas today now known as Algeria. Now, there was the settlements of the Ottoman Turks They set up various trading towns, and in some cases they cooperated, allowed autonomy on the part of the groups in North Africa. In other cases, they were more dominant. Oran, which is one of the large cities in Algeria at one point, had been an outpost of the Ottoman Turks, and later of the Spanish, and then eventually of the French. So there was a lot of resistance against the Spanish domination in North Africa. And the Ottoman Turks, when they came in during a latter period, many of the people in Algeria sided with the Ottoman Turks because they viewed them as being liberators from the Spanish monarchy. So all of this was going on during the so-called middle period of the Middle Ages, leading into the period of the Atlantic slave trade, the Spanish conquest, and eventually the conquest of the French. Now, the Ottoman Turks were also considered enemies of the United States. They were attempting to block the early U.S. Ships that were wanted to be engaged in trade in North Africa and the Mediterranean. And there was wars that were fought during the early 19th century between the United States and the Algerians, who at that time were still dominated by the Ottoman Empire. And even some of the traditional American patriotic songs, that talks about To the Shores of Tripoli, this is all dealing with the efforts on the part of the United States to defeat efforts to prevent them from trading in the Northwest Africa region. So yes, all of this was going on. And then eventually, after the Spanish had a very difficult time trying to conquer areas within North Africa, and they were resisted, the French in 1830 came in and conquered Algiers and Oran, killing many people. In fact, many historians, even French historians of that time period, describe the actions of the French colonialists as genocidal. They wiped out hundreds of Algerian villages. They killed hundreds of thousands of people just in the onslaught of French colonialism between 1830 and the 1870s. It's estimated that they killed as high as 825,000 Algerians. So it was a very bloody and a very genocidal onslaught on the part of the French colonialists. As you mentioned earlier, there are similarities between what happened in Haiti and also in Algeria. The thing about Algeria, though, was that the Europeans encouraged, the French in particular, encouraged mass immigration into Algeria. Hundreds of thousands of French nationals went there, and they assumed control of land, international trade, and administration of the territory, to the point where it is estimated that even Algiers and Oran, the two largest cities at some point, were dominated by French. There was more French there, French nationals there, than there were indigenous Algerians. And that was because a lot of the indigenous people had been forced out through the destruction of their businesses, their trading operations, and also their villages and small towns. So it was tremendous dislocation that took place that went into the millions of people.
Talk a bit more about what made French the French colonization of Algiers uniquely barbaric compared to the other ones. Talk a bit more about the settler colonialism and the apartheid practices that came with it.
Yeah, they tried to destroy the traditional cultures of the Arabs and the Berbers and the Africans who had been there for thousands upon thousands of years. They wanted to force people to speak French. They claimed that Algeria was a French overseas territory. Nonetheless, they treated the indigenous people as being inferior. So this was the contradiction. On the one hand, they would say, well, this is part of the French overseas empire, but at the same time, the Algerians were considered inferior to the French. So that was a major, major problem. And this ignited into rebellions all during the latter part of the 19th century. Going into the 20th century, there was continuing rebellions. There were efforts on the part of Algerian organizations, intellectuals, to claim a right to national independence from France. And this was heavily resisted by the French. Now,
And
go ahead.
you were talking about how the French encouraged immigration from France. So these are people
Yes,
who could come from Paris, they can come from Marseille, they can come from Cannes, they can come from uh, Versailles. So any part of France, the French colonial administration would encourage those people to migrate, set a post in Algeria where they were treated like gods. They got all the milk and honey in the world, and then the indigenous Algerians were basically treated like dirt, basically treated as a form of of apartheid. Uh, was that how the conditions were for the indigenous Algerians?
exactly. And if they didn't comply, they were either put in camps or killed. That was the reality of the situation. Between even under the Spanish, there was a lot of suppression and exploitation of the people, even as early as the 18th century. As I mentioned, between the 16th century and the latter part of the 18th century, the area was heavily dominated and attacked by the Spanish crown. And then after the weakening of Spain, France came in and resumed that role. And they used all types of methods to take over the country in 1830. But it took them at least 40 to 50 years to fully subdue the people of Algeria because they fought back even during the early years of French colonialism inside the country. So
Well,
it has a very, very bloody history.
that's a perfect segue then to this question, which is now often I ask you, when the country has gotten their independence from their colonialists, was it one of peaceful transition or one of violent conquest? I think anybody who knows anything about Algeria knows it was one of very bloody conquest for Algeria to get independence. So I'm going to ask this question then, which is why was the quest for independence from France, one of such violent struggle, and talk to us about Algeria's violent armed struggle against French rule and the equally brutal response by the French government under Charles de Gaulle, actually. So I'm very curious your response.
We'll have to go back to World War II because the Nazis, under the Third Reich of Adolf Hitler, marched into France in 1940. And initially, the resistance was extremely limited there. The Vichy French government was established, which was allied with the Third Reich. And Hitler said that as long as the French followed his dictates, they would not have to fully occupy France because they had other designs in other parts of the world, including the Soviet Union, as well as attempting to recapture colonies in North Africa along with their allies, the Italians, under Benito Mussolini. So during that time period, during the early period of World War II, the Algerian colony was dominated by the Vichy French government. Now, the British, the United States, and the so-called democratic French forces were totally opposed to this. So Churchill saw the potential danger of having Oran and other parts of Algeria dominated by a pro-Nazi regime. So in late 1942, Churchill went in and blew up French warships off the coast of Oran. And this facilitated the intervention of U.S. troops into Oran beginning in late 1942. And eventually they were able to undermine the Vichy control of Algeria. But there were huge battles that were fought, particularly in Egypt and in Tunisia and in Libya, between the British forces, the French forces that were allied with the so-called allies, being the French democratic forces of De-Gaulle, and also forces by the United States. The Italians were losing out in these conflicts between 1940 and 1941. Then you had the intervention of the German military under Rommel, the so-called Africa Corps, which went in as well to back up the Italian colonialists. And they too eventually were defeated as well. So that wiped out by 1942, 1943, the influence of the Italian fascists and the German fascists in North Africa. These are very, very important battles. They were huge battles, but they weakened the capacity of the fascists to control the North Africa region. This brought in more influence by the British. For example, the Italians had colonized Libya. There was a war fought between 1911 and 1931. Al Mokhtar, who was a revered hero of the Libyan people for fighting against Italian colonialism, was eventually defeated in the early 1930s. He was executed by the Italian fascists. Also in 1935, under Mussolini, the Italian fascists once again attempted to take control of Abyssinia, today known as Ethiopia. They did take control of it between 1935 and 1941, but they eventually collapsed as well. So in 1943, there was a air base that was established in Libya, and the Wheelus Air Base, which is important in latter years, particularly during the late 1960s, when the Revolutionary Command Council under Muammar Gaddafi took over in the so-called revolution of September 1st, 1969. But Algeria had always had resistance as well to the French colonial occupation. As I mentioned, even before that, the Portuguese and then the Spanish intervention faced extreme resistance over a period of 2.5 centuries. Then Algeria, during the war, was heavily occupied by U.S. troops. In fact, on a personal note, my father was in World War II, was drafted in 1941. In 1942-43, he was deployed in Algeria during the so-called Operation Torch, and spent a considerable amount of time in Oran, Algeria, during that time period.
Interesting.
Now, after the war ended in May of 1945, after the Nazis surrendered in Germany in May of 1945, on May 8th that year, in two Algerian cities, Sétif and another city, the Algerian people, who had been supportive of the French in their fight against the Nazis, went out and demonstrated in celebration of the end of the war, the resignation of Adolf Hitler, the defeat of Germany, and those who remained after Hitler took his own life. And they also, in those demonstrations, called for the independence of Algeria from France. This was in possibly May 8th, May 9th of 1945. In response to that, the demonstrations in Sétif and Guelma, the French military forces massacred estimated tens of thousands of Algerians in May of 1945. Now, the French have denied the extent of these massacres, but it's well documented today that this was what the French military did, even after they had been supported by the Algerian people, by other African people in their fight against Nazism during World War II. So this created
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's created a lot of animosity on the part of the Algerians because Some of them assumed that since Nazism had been defeated, then there would be political space for them to gain their own independence. They had been under occupation since 1830. That's over 120 years. No, 115 years at that time. So after 1945, there was animosity on the part of the Algerians. In 1953, there was a Congress held to try to figure out which way forward for the Algerian people. And then a declaration was issued in 1954 calling for the independence of Algeria and the formation of the National Liberation Front, the FLN of Algeria, which led the independence movement between 1954 and 1962, which represented another horrendously bloody period in Algerian history.
Before you talk a bit more about that, because do tell us a bit more about that. Now, was the reason why the Algerian War of Independence so violent? Not just the anti-colonial struggle was was uniquely violent with guerrilla warfare, urban terrorist attacks. France's response was also quite was also horrendous. Now, to the reason why it had come to that level was because France in general was often reluctant to give independence to their colonies, and France, in fact, you've talked many times to us about Charles de Gaulle and all the different ways France decolonized, but also didn't decolonize. So some ex-French colonies was basically their form of independence was yes, give us independence, but still treat us as basically an overseas territory of France. We're still going to be using the French the franc, the French currency, and so forth like that. And the military and the deep state and the elites are still heavily tied to France and so forth like that. Vietnam, the French reluctantly gave Vietnam its independence because the Vietnamese basically said, "Get out of our country. We want to be our own." Country, and literally had to fight a bloody war of independence because for that. So when we talk about Algeria, it's the same thing, but the Algerians basically say, no, we don't want to be a French overseas territory. No, we don't want the French to have any sort of control over our military. We don't want the French currency and so forth. And there we go. That's what led to a very bloody war of independence, and Charles de Gaulle basically, he basically and the overwhelmingly consensus of the French elites and the bourgeoisie and whatnot basically wanted Algeria to basically continue to remain a part of France, but just overseas, kind of like yes. Your response to that, have I gotten all of that correct?
Yes. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that they considered Algeria an overseas French territory.
Exactly.
They were settler colonialists. As I mentioned, hundreds of thousands of French nationals were encouraged to migrate to Algeria. So they considered this as their home. And they were willing to fight to the death, some of them, to try to maintain control. You mentioned Vietnam. The same year that the Algerian National Liberation Front launched the National Liberation Army War against French occupation, the French tried to undermine the efforts of the Vietnamese after they won and declared their independence in 1945 to try to maintain or recapture the northern region of Vietnam. The Battle of Dien Bien Phu is an historic battle. It gave inspiration to other colonized people throughout the world. That battle at Dien Bien Phu broke the back of French colonial control in Vietnam. Yet the Americans came in after that to deny the right of the entire Vietnamese people, those in the South, to hold a referendum on what the future of the country would be. So during the late 1950s up until around 1961, the machinations of U.S. imperialism kept South Vietnam under their control. Then in 61, the then President John F. Kennedy began to send in what he called military advisors into South Vietnam, which were really troops to train, anti-communist groups and military forces to fight against the internal National Liberation Forces, which they labeled as the Viet Cong.
Yeah.
They were really the National Liberation Front of Vietnam. And that went on between 1961 and 1963. And then in 63, there was a national security memorandum that was issued by John F. Kennedy. And it talked about the gradual withdrawal of some American troops from Vietnam over the next year. Now, whether he was serious about that, in my mind, is still up for debate. But I think he was positioning himself for the elections coming up in 1964. But anyway, that's one of the factors that have been attributed to his alienation from the military-industrial complex and the Central Intelligence Agency. He had already been alienated from the CIA after he fired two of the co-founders of the organization, General Cabell and also Alan Dulles. These were high-ranking CIA people. They had been terminated after the failure of the Bay of Pigs. But anyway, Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, and then 1964, under Lyndon Johnson, there was the so-called Gulf of Tonkin incident, which turned out to be a complete fabrication. They used this to justify the escalation of U.S. troops there. And then by March 1965, there was a full-blown U.S. invasion of hundreds of thousands of troops, which launched another decade of war in Vietnam. So French and U.S. imperialism have been hell-bent on maintaining their colonies, either through direct colonial occupation or through neocolonialism, which Nkrumah talked about in the early to mid-1960s as being the principal enemy of African independence. But yes, in response to the launching of the armed struggle in 1954, it was horrendous. They wiped out hundreds of villages in Algeria. They engaged in genocidal anti-insurgency policies. They also recruited Algerians to fight on the side of the French against their own people. And a lot of them were killed as well. It even started prior to the 1954 armed struggle. These puppets were targeted, by the National Independence Forces. So this went on all during the late 1950s up until the early 60s. And eventually, they had to relinquish control. De-Gaulle agreed to relinquish control to the people of Algeria so they could form their own independent existence. Yet, what happened was that a section of the settler colonialists refused, and they declared themselves independent from Paris.
Yeah.
And a lot of these people were part of the OAS, the French intelligence forces, which we had talked about before in regard to their activities in Senegal, in Cameroon, as well as in Guinea. They were very, very vicious in terms of assassination attempts, attempted coups d'etats like they attempted in Guinea in 1961, and other episodes in Cameroon, how they assassinated.
And they also, and when we talk about Algeria, didn't in the already brutal attempts to suppress the Algerian anti-colonial struggle, the OAS also tried, I believe they tried twice to coup General Jacques De-Gaulle. They tried to coup twice Charles de Gaulle.
Yes, they did. They did. They wanted him out. They felt that if they could take over, or somebody that was aligned with their politics, that they could maintain their control of their colonies in Algeria. And I think that was a fantasy on their part. Eventually, their efforts collapsed. and Algeria was able to declare its independence in 1962 under the leadership of the FLN, and Ben Bella became the first president of Algeria in 1962.
Fascinating, and then also during that struggle, uh, uh, we won't have time to get into this, but it almost deserves a show in and of itself. Is that there was a huge in America, I know for a fact you're probably very familiar with what they call white flight.
Yes, yes.
So, so, in case people don't know, so white flight is when white people, a diverse white community, it could be upper class with the middle class and the working class, literally move out of whatever neighborhood because they do not want to integrate with black people, people of color, but largely black people. And in Algeria, you kind of had a version of that where a lot of the what they call the pied the
Noir, yeah.
yes, the Pieds-noirs. So these
The
are basically
colognes, yeah.
French. And these are basically French Algerian, French center colonialists. Many of them actually moved out of
Yes,
Algeria when it became independent and moved back to France. And some of them, of course, experienced some of them did experience racism, but a lot of them actually just assimilated very well into the white French community. Many of them actually became part of the National Front and other far right movements.
yes,
Others just became regular French folks who really didn't give a shit anymore about losing Algeria. But then others like the OAS became part of just far right networks. Some of them joined. Some of them became part of Franco's deep state. Others became part of the of Operation Condor and the far right of Latin America, even joining forces with the runaway Nazi war criminal Klaus Barbie and so forth. And then the ones who even just stayed in France, again, many of them joined the National Front. Some of them joined the French deep state, and many of them joined the racist French police force, who, when other Algerian immigrants moved out of Algeria for whatever reason, hoping for a better life in France, were put in these ghettos, the banlieues, the suburbs, and so forth, and faced the kind of extreme, racism, xenophobia, and whatnots from these Pieds-noirs sort of folks. So I just have to put that in there because it's quite fascinating. It deserves an entire show, in and of itself. But I'm very curious your response to that before we talk about Algeria as an independent country.
yeah. That's very important that you mentioned that because the treatment of the North African diaspora in France and other European countries as well is telling, in regard to the racism that is inherent in the French capitalist system. And of course, the French have attempted in the past to put forward a notion that they were more liberal. This whole notion of assimilation
Yeah.
was emphasized, yet it is not a reality. When you look at the situation that has been prevailing now for several decades in France, outside of cities like Paris, for example, where you have North Africans and Africans from other parts of the continent are restricted in these areas. And they're heavily policed. And we've seen the rebellions that have erupted over the years, over the last 2 decades or more, among these population groups. And a lot of it is sparked by the harsh living conditions they are subjected to, as well as the police brutality, as happened 3 years ago after the police murder of a youth of North African ancestry, and it erupted into several weeks of urban rebellions in various parts of France. So this is still going on. And even 2 decades ago, I think it was Nicolas Sarkozy was the interior minister,
Yeah.
and he referred to the people who were rebelling in France as social scum. Now, he eventually became the president
Well,
of France.
actually, you're being way too soft on the far right douchebag and war
Okay.
criminal at large. He said he actually went he actually yeah he called them something like scum or vermin, and he said that he was going to clean them with the Le Kirchner, which is a kind of a special kind of a vacuum cleaner and so forth like that. And he's supposed to be
Yeah.
the liberal alternative
Hmm.
to the fascists of of the National Front and so forth like that. And yeah, and it's again
Yes.
and what makes it even more scandalous is okay, yes, these people are their parents and grandparents were Algerian immigrants or Moroccan immigrants or whatever
Yes.
parts of or whatever part of North Africa, whatever part of an ex-colony that France has colonized. Yes, they were immigrants, but these people have been living in France for over 10 years, 30 years, and so forth like that. They are French. Some of them don't even
Yes.
speak Arabic. They only speak French, and yet they're treated as a bunch of backward immigrants that don't want to assimilate when it's actually French institutional racism that does not want to integrate with them. So no matter how many times they try to apply for a job, if they have a foreign sounding name, Arabic, Muslim sounding name, they don't even get responses.
Yes.
Uh, responses from that. And many of those people in the French police force were settler colonialists who just treated those very people like dirt back in the settler colony of Algeria. So that's a very important thing that we have to mention. And that's and that was one of the ways that, by the way, that how Sarkozy became president. He ran on this very macho right wing you know, yeah, it was a very right wing campaign when Sarkozy became president of France and so forth, and that has to go in the historical records because a lot of my French friends, would minimize that and so forth like that. But that's literally how Sarkozy started his political career, and he was the interior minister under. Chirac was president, and Dominique de Villepin was the prime minister. So, yeah,
Yeah. So that really exposed even further the domestic racism of France, and that extends to their so-called overseas territories as well. In 1961, there were demonstrations inside of France in solidarity with the Algerians because of the massacres that were taking place, and the French police actually opened fire and killed a number of people who were involved in these demonstrations. Now, they have minimized that as well, saying not as many
yes,
people were killed as the Algerians and other left-wing forces have said. They said there was possibly thousands of people who were killed to suppress those demonstrations. But this is just another illustration of the character of French racism, institutionalized racism, and repression.
and the
We
extreme
talk about the,
denialism that also goes with that because it was denied for many years that these French Algerian citizens,
yes,
whatever you want to call them, who were showing solidarity to the Algerians who were fighting their war of independence, which they were owed, and the French police literally massacred them, shot them, and it was so bad they were even dumping injured people into the river.
yes,
So when people go to parts of Paris and they're having a fun time, on the boats, as tourists
yes.
do, and looking at the beauty of Paris, there were people who were unarmed people who were shot by the French police
Mm-hmm.
and dumped into these things. And France, well, France to this, and it took a long time for France to just admit that yes, this happened. Je suis, désolé, but
Yes.
it's unbelievable, though.
Yeah, it was a similar situation with the massacre of the Senegalese rifles in 1944. These were people who had been imprisoned by the Nazis during the period of the Third Reich when they took over France. And a lot of those people were tortured and died in the Nazi concentration camps. And in 1944, They had been denied back pay for their imprisonment and service in the military. And they held a silent demonstration, and they were massacred. And the French denied that up until very recently, that they said, yeah, it did happen, but not as many Africans were killed as the Africans say were killed. In fact, there's a film on that massacre done by Samben Ousmane, who was a Senegalese filmmaker, Marxist filmmaker. He's deceased now, but he did a whole series of films largely based in Senegal. But he has one particular film that deals with that whole episode during World War II. So yeah, they do have a history of suppression going back to the Haitian colonization and enslavement of Africans there, the type of conditions that people have to live under. And they revolted in 1791. Took them 12 years to win their independence. But after they won their independence, France imposed sanctions.
Yeah.
They had to pay, quote, what they call indemnity. From 1826, all the way up to even the modern period. The United States refused to even recognize them from 1804 all the way up to 1862. The only reason they recognized them in 1862 under Abraham Lincoln was because they wanted to get Africans in the United States to support and to enlist in the Union Army. So they have a long history of all of this. But to go back to the early history of the Algerian Revolution in terms of its independence phase, Ben Bella became president then, and he was really celebrated and recognized and hailed by people all over Africa and all over the entire so-called global South at the time. And what happened was that in 1963, over a dispute between Morocco and Algiers, the so-called Sand War. We talked about this last week when we dealt with
West
Morocco.
Sahara, correct?
Yeah, the Western Sahara and then the Kingdom of Morocco. But the People's Democratic Republic of Algeria, which is the official name of the country, had to defend itself, defend the revolution in 1963, and they had the support of Cuban internationalist forces during that time period. And they were able to defeat the Moroccans. And I also mentioned last week the episode when Ben Bella visited the United States during the Kennedy administration, and he was warned by Kennedy's National Security Council that he should not fly to Cuba, because he had been invited there because there was a plot on the part of the anti-Castro Cubans, who are trained by the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States, to shoot down his aircraft. And they said he shouldn't go. Well, he went anyway, and his aircraft was not shot down. That's just an example of the duplicity of the US administration, even under John F. Kennedy, who I mentioned before had started the first Senate subcommittee on Africa. Ostensibly,
let's actually, okay, so very briefly before we talk about all of the different presidents that Algeria has had for its independence. So very briefly, what led to France finally and reluctantly giving Algeria its independence? Because I believe Charles De Gaulle really pissed off a lot of French people in the French deep state. Again, he was twice couped, almost couped, for finally saying, I reluctantly give the Algerians their independence.
Well, it was the popular will of the Algerian people, the international solidarity with the people of Algeria, and they were losing a considerable amount of troops. The Algerians were engaging in guerrilla warfare, both in the countryside as well as in the city of Algiers. So yes, they were systematically forced out as a result of these struggles that were taking place. And also I wanted to mention that people like Frantz Fanon, for example, who was originally from Martinique, which is a French colony in the Caribbean, and he was trained as a psychiatrist in France, in the medical school there. And he had actually joined the French military and went to Algeria during World War II. And he served there after the war. And once he saw what was actually going on in regard to the French colonial system, he switched sides and became a cadre within the FLN. Uh, in fact, was a contributing editor to the El Mujadid French, the journal of the FLN, and he wrote extensively on the anti-colonial struggle there. A lot of his writings are captured in a book entitled A Dying Colonialism, and later The Wretched of the Earth, which he was working on at the time of his death
Yeah.
in 1961. And people can read Black Skins, White Masks, which came out earlier, and then they could read his essays on a dying colonialism, as well as The Wretched of the Earth, to get insights into the character of French colonialism. The last chapter in The Wretched of the Earth, he talks about the psychological disorders of the colonized people and the psychological disorders that are prompted by colonial rule, even among the French soldiers themselves. And he attributes these psychiatric disorders to the character of the colonial system. And when I was in undergraduate school, way back in the mid 1970s, I was thinking about going into psychology. But when I read the works of R.D. Laing, who was a Scottish psychiatrist, who debunked, a lot of the theory of psychiatry up until that time period, and the methodologies that they used during that period, like institutionalization of people who had psychiatric disorders, and also shock treatments that were used against people. He was perhaps the first widely known psychiatrist to debunk those psychiatric treatment methods. And also, and then after I read R.D. Laing, I read Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth, and I said, no, this is I abandoned any idea of pursuing a career in psychology and went into political science. I said these are political issues.
Yeah.
They're not psychiatric issues. So that was probably the most extreme analysis and critique of Western psychiatry during the 1950s and 1960s by R.D. Laing and later Frantz Fanon, and others began to pick up on the same theory as well. So yes, Ben Bella became the leader, but he was deposed in 1965 by a man by the name of Boumediene.
Abayomi.
And what was behind the coup against? Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, so before we get there, so now, so the French have lost a major colony, not just a major colony, but they lost a major settler colonial place, which would have been, which would have been, their base and so forth. So now that Algeria is now an independent country, and now we'll look at the legacies of each president. So much of Algerian history from the end of the 1950s to the 1990s is under the rule of the National Liberation Front. And before we talk about each president, so according to Wikipedia, their ideology is one of Algerian nationalism, Arab nationalism, pan-Arabism, Arab socialism, social democracy, democratic socialism, anti-imperialism, and anti-Zionism. And they were influenced by Nasser's, Gamal Nasser, political philosophy and movement in Egypt. Revolutionary socialism, revolutionary vanguard. They have factions in the party that go from center left to the far left. And from their founding until 2019, they were members of Socialist International. I'll remind the audience that's where the global center left, leftist, or strongly more left leaning parties meet to see how they advance the global left agenda and help one another out. However, the organization has been dominated by Western European and Nordic social democratic parties who have been guilty of supporting Western imperialism and social imperialism. And since the late 70s and the early 80s, many of those parties have pivoted to the hard right domestically on their own working class. And the same is true of the sister party, the Progressive Alliance. And many of the global South and those from non-European, non-North American worlds often
You're
can be too.
freezing up.
Oh, okay, all good. Yes, and
Yeah, now, but a couple times you did freeze. So, but
oh,
go ahead. Yeah.
apologies for that. And so,
Hmm.
yeah, and sometimes, a lot of the global South and those from non-European, non-North American worlds can be too influenced by this power dynamic and playbook of Western, Euro-Nordic social democratic left. The National Liberation Front, they've been lifelong members of the Progressive Socialist Organization of the Mediterranean, also known as the Mediterranean Socialist Conference. And because them and other members rightly felt that Socialist
Froze,
International,
froze again. Yeah.
oh, apologies for that. Yes, and they widely feel
I can
that,
hear you now.
okay, okay. Oh, apologies for that, folks. So the National Liberation Front is also members of the Progressive Socialist Organization of the Mediterranean, the PSMOM, also known as the Mediterranean Socialist Conference. And because them and other members rightly felt that Socialist International was too much dominated by the German SPD, whom they rightly felt was too much influenced by NATO ideology, the US and France, they're also members of the Russian-led initiative, the Forum of Supporters of the Struggle Against Modern Practices of Neocolonialism, or For the Freedom of Nations, also known as the For the Freedom of Nations, which is a Russian-led inter-party movement with a claimed goal of uniting political parties from various nations to counter neocolonialism. The movement was officially created in February 2024 on the initiative of the United Russia Party, which supports Putin. However, it's more right-leaning in its opposition to Western imperialism, but I think it believes all the importance of sovereignty. Anywho, so the dominant ruling party in Algeria is the National Liberation Front. Now, tell us about from there. Tell us about the socio-economic legacy of Farhat Abbas, who was in power from September 19th, 1958 to August 61, followed by Banous Ben Khada, August 9th, 1961 to September 27th, 1962, and then Abdur Ramin Fares, April 13th, 1962 to September 1962, and then comes the political comeback of Farhat Abbas, September 25th, 1962 to September 15th, 1963. How do you assess their socio-economic legacy to the mass working class in Algeria? Oh, can you hear me, Abayomi?
Yeah, I can hear you now. It was
Okay.
kind of breaking up for a
Yes.
few seconds. Yeah.
Yes. So talk to us about the first three presidents of Algeria, their socioeconomic legacy to the mass working class in Algeria.
You're talking about the FLN leaders.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Well,
The first three presidents, and then then Farhat Abbas, who also had a comeback. So the first four
mhm.
presidents.
Yeah, they were committed to nationalization of their industries. Algeria became a huge supplier of oil as well as natural gas. It still is up until this day, and they supply a lot of resources, energy resources to France. So yeah, that was their main focus. Also to support other national liberation movements that remained under colonialism during that particular time period.
And then, how do you assess the socio-economic legacy of Ahmed Ben Bala, who was president September 15th, 1963, until he was overthrown in a coup June 19th, 1965? Talk to us about him and what were the conditions that led to his ouster?
Yeah, well, there were political differences, differences in regard to style of work, personality differences with Ben Bella, and which was unfortunate because he had a image internationally as the leader, political leader of the Algerian Revolution. But by 1965, he had fallen out of favor with other leading figures in the FLN and within the Algerian government, and he was removed from office. He was jailed for a period of time and then went to live in exile. But I want to mention that the people that came after him, Boumediene. Their
Yes.
policies really weren't that different as far as I could see. They seemed to maintain the same anti-imperialist direction, the internal development of the economy based upon nationalization. So yes, it wasn't, I don't believe it was really strict or strong political differences that led to his overthrow. But there was opposition in the streets, particularly among youth, to his overthrow, but it did not prevail in 1965.
So that's interesting, and it's safe to say that the National Liberation Front uh, uh, pivoted more to the right, pivoted more to the socio-economic right.
No, I wouldn't say that,
Okay,
particularly during the 1960s,
okay.
because first of all,
No, go ahead, go ahead.
yes, yeah, I would say that, for example, um, they were heavily involved in developments that were taking place in other parts of the African continent. In fact, the liberation of Algeria would not have happened as soon as it did without the intervention of independent Mali under Modibo Keita. In fact, they opened up a southern front um, after there were problems with Morocco. And the opening up of the southern front played a key role in pressurizing the French to abandon Algeria as a colony. And also, I wanted to mention that Nelson Mandela, when he left South Africa in 1961, 1962, he did part of his military training in Morocco in an FLN camp. So they were very close in that regard.
That's
And also, he gained training in Ethiopia as well,
then
even with the monarchy.
but then how do you assess the socio-economic legacy of Ahmed Ben Bala, who was president September 15, 1963, until he was overthrown in a coup June 19, 1965? And what were the conditions that led to his what were the conditions that led to his ouster?
Yeah, well, his policy was the FLN policy of nationalization, of utilizing the resources inside the country for the benefit of the people. It's an anti-colonial policy, Pan-African as well as Pan-Arab foreign policy. They were involved in the formation of the Organization of African Unity in 1963. They participated in the so-called Casablanca Group, which was the anti-imperialist forces that grew out of the overthrow and assassination of Patrice Lumumba in 1961. It caused a split among the independent African states from the Casablanca Group, which was considered more anti-imperialist, and the Monrovia Group and the Brazzaville Group, which still remained heavily allied with France, Britain, and the United States.
But
So
then
Mandela, yeah, go
but
ahead.
but 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 then what led to him being ousted then?
Mandela, I believe it was differences in styles of work and personality between Boumediene and others, and Ben Bella and his allies within the FLN. But fundamentally, I really have not been able to detect any fundamental difference in terms of the political ideology of Ben Bella and the others who came after him, particularly during the 1960s, 70s. Yes.
Okay, so then how do you assess the socio-economic legacy of Uwari Boumediene, who first ruled as a military dictator from June 15, 1965 to December 10, 1976, and Pervez Musharraf of Pakistan, he took off his military uniform at some point and became a civilian dictator from December 1976 up to his death while in office, December 27, 1978. How do you assess his socio-economic legacy? Was it one of good left-wing causes, or negative right-wing, far-right ones, and where we start to see the National Liberation Front pivoting more to the economic rights? Very curious response.
I would think it has to be divided up into at least two different eras.
Okay.
After he took over in 1965, they maintained an anti-imperialist, pan-Arabist, pan-Africanist approach. In 1967, in fact, Moise Tshombe of the then Zaire had been endorsed by the United States they made him prime minister in late 1964, and he was still a force inside the country for several years. He was traveling to Europe it was in the late 1960s, I believe maybe 1969, and it was the Algerian military that forced down his plane and imprisoned him for the crimes that had been committed against the people of Congo. He was heavily involved in the assassination of Patrice Lumumba along with Mobutu Sese Seko. So that was one major contribution that the Algerian government made to the African Revolution. Then in 1969, they hosted the first Pan-African Cultural Festival. That was in August of 1969. It lasted approximately a month. And that was designed to counter the so-called negritude ideological orientation towards African independence that had been advanced by people like Leopold Sedar Senghor, the poet and writer. And even before that, it had been endorsed by a fellow Martinican who got a lot of criticism on the part of Frantz Fanon and his work. So yes, in 1969, this festival was held in Algiers, and it brought all the legitimate liberation movements in Africa were there. It also brought the Palestine Liberation Organization, played a key part in that festival, along with the Black Panther Party from the United States. They were invited there. They were given a office, and they were designated as representatives of the Afro-American people. They set up an Afro-American cultural center in Algiers, and the Black Panther Party was there distributing its literature. During that period of time, they invited Eldridge Cleaver to remain in Algeria. He had previously been in Cuba, and they were given an embassy. The Vietnamese had moved out of their embassy, and their embassy was turned over to the Black Panther Party. This was in August of 1969. So they recognized the African American struggle for liberation through the Black Panther Party, which they considered at the time to be the genuine representatives and the vanguard of the African American liberation movement inside the United States. Now that changed after a few years. And we can get into that a little bit later, but
but then tell us. Okay, so the first half of his time in office, socioeconomic wise, he's doing good for Algerians. Internationally, he's doing good. But then tell us about the second half of his presidency from December 10, 1976 to December 27, 1978, he died in office. And then that's when he starts to pivot more to the economic right when it comes to socioeconomics in Algeria.
Yes, more centrist, I would say. And they began to exploit and drill and export more oil and natural gas resources to Western capitalist countries. So the national income of the country went up significantly, and there was unrest inside the country in 1978 due to some of the economic problems that had arose during the late 1970s. But these economic problems have to be looked at within a broader global context. After 1975, there was a huge restructuring of the world capitalist system. This was after the defeat of U.S. imperialism in Southeast Asia, after the liberation of the former Portuguese colonies in Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique, Angola, Sao Tome and Principe. This had a tremendous impact on the world capitalist system. So they began to restructure the system during that particular time period. So you had economic downturns, even in the Western imperialist countries, rising unemployment, inflation, and almost no growth, what they call stagflation. There was also the 1973 Arab oil embargo after the so-called October War, or the Yom Kippur War of 1973, which Egypt, under Anwar Sadat, launched an attack against the Israeli occupation of the Sinai. They were forced out of the Sinai during the 1970s. This, of course, led to the Camp David Accords later in 1977-78, was officially signed in 1979. So after Boumediene had passed away in office, the crisis continued, but it did stabilize during the period of the late 70s and all the way through the 1980s.
So, how do you assess the socioeconomic legacy? Because he died while in office. So, then how do you assess the socioeconomic legacy of his successor, Rabah Bilat, December 27, 1978 to February 9th, 1979?
Yeah, this was more or less a transitional government. Elections were later held, and we had the rise of another head of state in Algeria.
So that's Chadi Benjiji. Am I saying his name correctly?
Yeah, Benjadid. Yeah, right.
Yes. So he served in office February 9th, 1979 to January 11th, 1992, until he resigned. How do you assess his socioeconomic legacy?
Well, obviously there was a lot of discontent during that particular time period, and he allowed for the transformation of the Algerian constitution to allow multi-party elections inside the country. Prior to that, it was pretty much a one-party state under the FLN. There had been an Algerian Communist Party as well, but it liquidated itself in 1954 to join the FLN. So in that sense, it became part of the National Liberation Front, the FLN, inside the country. Elections were held in 1991, and there was a formation of a party called the.
But that's also when Algeria starts to pivot a lot to the economic right, to neoliberalism and so forth. Correct?
Yes, but it was a pattern that was taking place across Africa at the time, particularly in the early 1990s. And that has to be placed in the context of the collapse of the Comecon sector, the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, which brought together various socialist and socialist-oriented states, the Soviet Union, the German Democratic Republic, Czechoslovakia, Romania. All these countries were part of Comecon. Even Vietnam, Mozambique, and others were candidate members or members that were more involved with the whole socialist economic trading system. Even Ethiopia, after the late 1970s, were part of Comecon. So, but with the collapse of the Eastern European socialist countries in the late 1980s, the last one, of course, was Romania. And then the collapse of the Soviet Union in late 1991, then the outbreak of the civil wars in the Federal Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia. Even though Yugoslavia had had problems under Tito in the early days with Stalin, there was a difference that erupted during after World War II and up until the period of Stalin. Then there was closer relations between the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia after the demise of Joseph Stalin. But the point I'm making is that there was a lot of instability that took place in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe and Southern Europe, in those countries that were socialist oriented. And a similar situation happened with countries in Africa as well. The Ethiopian Workers' Party of Ethiopia collapsed in May of 1991. So this was the atmosphere that existed. So in those countries where you have rebellions and mass demonstrations calling for the dissolution of one-party states and for the carrying out of the forming of alternative parties and multi-party elections. This happened in Algeria as well. So in 1991, elections were held.
Wait,
Yeah.
but are we still talking about the period of Chadali Ben Hajid before he resigns?
Yes, and 91 elections were held in was supposed to be three different phases. The first phase and the second phase, the FIS, the Islamic Salvation Front, which was an Islamist party, it appears as if they were going to win the national elections. So the ruling party at that time canceled the elections.
Oh wait, but before that happens, so wait, but before that happens, so Ben Jajid, so he resigns because he's opening up Algeria to democracy, correct?
There was a civil war that erupted.
Okay.
After,
Oh wait. Okay.
yeah.
But before we get to that civil war,
Mm-hmm.
so he resigns, and then for 3 days, Algeria had Abdul Malek Ben Hablij. I am so sorry, folks. I'm butchering his name. Who served in office for 3 days, for a whopping 3 days, January the 11th, 1992 to January 14th, 1992. Then came Mohammed Bouyadef, who was not part of the National Liberation Front. He was part of a breakaway group who, on paper, was supposed to be a left-wing alternative to National Liberation Front. But he was murdered the 29th of June, 1992. How do you assess the socioeconomic legacy of both these men? And who do you think murdered Mohammed?
Well, I think it was an internal dispute within the ruling interests in Algeria during that particular time period. I mean, he was murdered openly while he was giving an address in front of a podium, and it was shown internationally. So there was no question in my mind, at least, there was some internal conflict within the Algerian ruling parties at the time. And those parties, principally, even though they were breakaway, they came out of the same political construct as the FLN or the National Liberation Army.
Interesting. And this is and of course this is when the National Liberation Front at this time is starting to pivot more and more to the economic right and embracing neoliberalism. They're a secular party. They believe in secularism, which is great. So they are socially liberal. So they are socially liberal in that respect. They do believe in feminism in that respect, but they do start to pivot very hard to the economic right and embracing reactionary capitalism and neoliberalism. And so from there, and so now from 1991 to 2002, Algeria found itself in a highly brutal civil war. So what was the civil war about? I understand that the Sunni sectarian extremist far-right Islamist movements, many of them inspired by the Muslim Brotherhood movement, basically wanted power. They weaponized legitimate grievances that people had when it came to income inequality, the various shortcomings of neoliberalism. The Western-backed alliance, but they were a fake far-right populist party and vowed, if elected, that they were going to install a theocracy. And the powers to be in Algeria and the secular-minded folks responded back brutally, and then there was extreme violence on both sides taking place with the Algerian secularists, albeit very right leaning ones tied to the military, and more won in the end after horrendous violence, and the Islamists also engaged in horrendous violence, and the military apparently at some point infiltrated them and even allowed them to be even more violent. And then after that, and then at some point, all of that collapsed, and the National Liberation Front, the secularists, won in the end. Am I very correct in how in how I've explained the Algerian civil war?
Yes. Some people, thought that the FLN government and the military and the other parties which came out of the FLN were too brutal in suppressing the FIS. And it was another a military group that came out of the FIS as well. But as far as most Algerian people were concerned, they had to be defeated because otherwise they would have established some type of Islamist government there, which would have set the country back way prior to the national liberation movement that arose after World War II. So they emphasized that they had to fight against this attempt to reinstitute some type of caliphate in Northwest Africa, which have taken the country back even prior to the Ottoman Turkish rule, which took place centuries before. So they were defeated. The Islamists were defeated, but they did institute reforms in the aftermath of the war in the period of the 2000s, and that has extended all the way up to the present period.
And yes, it was a horrific civil war, and there are even some evidence that found that the ruling party, its military, its secret services, had even infiltrated the FIS. That's basically Algeria's version of what the Muslim Brotherhood is in Egypt and so forth. Had infiltrated those groups and then basically allowed them to basically be as extremist as they want to be. Now, apparently, there were even some Islamists that thought that the FIS was way too brutal, and the FIS even murdered even murdered and eradicated them. It was a horrendous civil war on both sides, and with that, that's a perfect segue to this question. So during this, civil war, you had Ali Kafid of the National Liberation Front, who was back in power, if they ever really left. He's president during the bloody civil war of Algeria, July 2nd, 1992 to January 31st, 1994. What is his socioeconomic legacy, if he has any to even speak of?
Yeah, I think they wanted to maintain Algeria as a secular state. They wanted to keep the flow of energy resources going out of the country in order to try to stabilize the economy. And one interesting thing about them is that during the first Iraq War, they did not participate alongside some Arab states in the invasion of Iraq. So that was very positive. And also later on, when they were out to destroy the Jemahariya in Libya in 2011, Algeria did not participate in that as well, even though some other neighboring states like Egypt and even Sudan had played some minor role in that whole process, not to mention Turkey and others. Qatar was one as well that participated in that shameful war in 2011, which brought about not only the destruction of Libya, but created instability throughout many parts of North as well as West Africa, which is continuing as we speak.
And then after the gentleman I mentioned came, you then had Liamen Zural, Apologies if I'm butchering his name. And he's leader January 31st, 1994 to April 27, 1999. What is his socioeconomic legacy? And he is still president during during the Civil War, but he's politically independent. But is he still very much strongly associated with the NLF? Correct.
Yes, NLF and the military as well. Yeah, so they continue the same policy of attempt to end to defeat the FIS and the other armed Islamist group that was there. And eventually they were able to defeat them. They agreed to some type of truce in the late 1990s and early 2000s, which ended
Yes.
the Civil War.
Yes, so that's when we have Abdul Aziz Bouteflika.
Yeah,
Politically, again, he's supposed to be an independent, but he is still strongly associated, I assume, correct, with the
yeah,
NLF. So the
yeah.
Algerian Civil War ends under his reign in 2002, and he lives through the North African Arab Spring. What is his socioeconomic legacy, Abayomi? But what led to his resignation in April 2020?
Well, there were demonstrations during that particular time period in Algeria, but during the so-called Arab Spring, there were demonstrations that erupted in 2011 in Algeria, but they did not result in any destabilization of the government. In my view, looking back, and even at the time, were strong indications that this was an attempt at another color revolution,
Yeah.
which happened in Libya, and it happened in Egypt and Tunisia as well. It just wasn't clear during the period between December of 2010 up until the fall of the Ben Ali government in January of 2011 in Tunisia, and the collapse of Hosni Mubarak several weeks later in Egypt, because these collapses of government, although they were, of course, spawned by mass protests against legitimate grievances in Tunisia as well as in Egypt, they did not lead to any civilian revolutionary party or alliance coming to power. So in Egypt, they was taken over by a military junta. And then after that, elections were held in 2012. Took them a year to get elections held, which brought the Muslim Brotherhood party associated with the Muslim Brotherhood, brought them to power, and they only lasted for a year.
And
And
now
due
it's
to
it's currently under a far right military junta again with General Sisi. Then,
Yeah, and a lot of Egyptians supported that coup in that took place in 2013, because after the year of control by the Muslim Brotherhood, there were various secular groups that went out and demonstrated against him. Egyptians of all different social classes and economic sectors supported the takeover by Al Fatah and, of course, Abdel Al Fatah Al Sisi. And he remains in power today. He took off his military uniform, ran for office, and he has been elected in two consecutive elections in Egypt. So that is the situation right now.
But what's so sad and tragic about that is the very things that people were protesting. Their grievances have not been met. It is still neoliberal. It is still neoliberalism. It is still the horrendous economic policies of a Hosni Mubarak and an Anwar Sadat. But then what? Why was Algeria then able to? Yeah, why was the National Liberation Front able to sustain itself? Because after Bouteflika, resigns, another independent. Again, do I have to ask if he's even associated with the NLF? Abdul Qadir Ben Salah, and he's president from April from April the 9th, 2019 to December 19, 20 to December 19, 2019. How do you assess his socioeconomic legacy if he has one to even speak of?
Yeah, I think he was trying to stabilize the country because there had been demonstrations against the government of Bouteflika, and he had gotten older. And some people said he really wasn't running the country, that there were others that were running the country on his behalf. So he was more or less a transitional leader. And then, of course, we had the rise of Tebboune, who is still the current head of state in Algeria.
And how do you assess? Yes, exactly. And he's supposedly an independent. how
Yeah.
how do you assess his time in office so far? And he has been in office since December 19th, 2019.
He's trying to stabilize the country, stabilize the economy. Domestically, he has a lot of critics, particularly among young people who are dissatisfied with the economic status of many people inside of Algeria. Yet at the same time, they have been very much supportive, continuing their support of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, led by the Polisario Front and the Sahrawi Arab Liberation
Yes.
Army. And also about them, they've been still highly critical of France and its colonial legacy. Diplomatic relations between France and Algeria are not good up until this point, because even under Emmanuel Macron, he has made statements to the effect that Algeria never existed prior to 1830 when they were taken over by French colonialism. He said, well, it really didn't exist. There was really no such thing as Algeria, even though the regents of Algiers existed even during the period of the Ottoman Turks. And there's history that goes back far, far deeper than that, which we've talked about, you know. So all of that is just racist propaganda. He also recognized the group that fought, the Algerians that fought alongside the French imperialists during the War of National Liberation. They recognized them as some type of patriots for France. But at the same time, France needs the energy resources, the natural gas in particular, from Algeria. So during the early phase of the Russian special military operations in Ukraine, Macron went to Algiers in order to renegotiate higher supplies of natural gas from Algeria. So they can't get away from the colonial legacy that they've established. But the anti-French sentiment, which still remains in Algeria, has also spread to other African states. Mali, for example, which has a border with Algeria, southern border. And of course, Burkina Faso and Niger have broken with the French military structures, causing the G5 of the Sahel to collapse because Mauritania was left as the only state to be a part of that construct. Operation Barkhane, which was also a so-called anti-terrorism outfit led by France in West Africa, has also collapsed. Even in Senegal, which has not gone as far as the AES states, there have been discussions about French troops leaving Senegal, as well as along with Chad, which is a former French colony. So we see this.
But in terms of socioeconomics, the current president of Algeria has not been pivoting more to the left, is still engaging in
More of a centrist type system. They're anti-French, but at the same time, no, they have not gone more left in terms of internal economic policies. And that is
yeah.
a problem for the existing government.
But then, okay, so I have to ask this question, which is historically,
Mhm.
you've already talked about this, but let's talk about this a bit more. So historically, since independence, Algeria's foreign policy, is it one closely aligned with Western imperialism, like France, the U.S., Britain, Canada, and collectively and individually NATO and EU member states? Uh, or was it more closely aligned with the USSR, the former Eastern European communist states, China, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, North Korea? Or was it not aligned, but it leaned more towards the West than it did the communist nations? Very curious your response.
Yeah, I think it leaned more towards the left, particularly during the early decades of the independence of the country. They supported the national liberation movements, the armed phase, even of the national liberation movements. They considered themselves a socialist oriented state. The official name of the country, the People's Democratic Republic of Algeria, clearly, has a left wing socialist orientation in name. Now, in terms of economic policy, they still have close ties with France in terms of the supply of natural gas and oil to those countries. So it's more like on the one hand, they still say that they're anti-imperialists, that they're in favor of national liberation. They support the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic,
But
and they
on
have
their
not
own
wavered.
domestic audience, they
Yeah,
pivoted to the right.
perhaps, yeah, I would think so. But it's happened in other states as well. I don't
Wow.
think it's just happened in Algeria. They have more of a free market type economy. But look at China. Look at Vietnam. They don't have the same policy as they did decades ago. China is not the same, even though the Communist Party is in control. The Communist Party of China, they do have a different economic approach, a different economic policy, which has worked, in my opinion, for them. They're the second largest economy in the world. They're still in a position to front off the United States, keep them out of Taiwan, and serve as a force, which is still hated by imperialism, whether it's the British,
Well, well,
whether it's
well,
the
well, well,
United
well, well,
States, the
well, well,
French,
well,
and so
well,
forth. Yeah,
then that's a perfect segue to this question, which is
yeah.
what is Algeria's relations with BRICS? Does it have strong relations with any specific member? And that will continue unless Western imperialism sabotages it. I'm
Mm.
very curious to
Yeah, I
respond.
think they have very close relations with BRICS member states. Um, I don't think they've joined, but they are observers of what is going on there. The whole notion of de-dollarization and the movement against and away from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank is something that even the current government would be in support of. And BRICS is attempting to de-dollarize the world economy. They're also behind the New Development Bank, as was headed by the former Brazilian president, Dilma Rousseff. They're trying to develop different economic mechanisms for loans and cooperation that goes outside of the IMF and the World Bank. And even though these countries are by no means perfect, and they still have trade relations with the United States, uh, their existence, BRICS, even the non-aligned movement, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the group of 77 plus China, still pose a threat to the dominance of US imperialism. And if you listen to the rhetoric of the previous Biden administration, the previous Obama administrations, and the two consecutive presidencies of Donald J. Trump, they hate China. They fear the struggle against globalization, and they do not like Russia. Russia, even though Russia, most of it is still is considered a part of Europe, they don't consider Russia as part of Europe, and even Russia itself. I was listening to the foreign minister on several occasions, Sergei Lavrov. He refers to the European Union, the UK, and the United States as, quote, the West, unquote, as if they're not a part of it. which
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
is very, very good. They recognize that they're not considered a part of the West, that they're considered Orientals, because a lot of people in Russia and, of course, the former Soviet Union were Asiatic peoples as well, like in Mongolia, the people in Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan. Those people are really Central Asians. Um,
yeah, yes, that's
so
true.
yeah, so this is a major issue that the West has created itself through successive wars in regard to how they view Russia and the former Soviet Union. They do not view them as being part and parcel of the Western European civilized world. And it's really interesting that this is going on and that Russia refers now to these countries as, quote, the West, unquote. So, but Russia really, now there's an attempt on the part of the Trump administration and his right-wing allies to break the Russian Federation away from China and away from the global South in an alliance with the European Union and the UK and North America, Canada and the United States.
Yeah,
But the Russian Federation has not bought into that at all. That's what these negotiations are about. They're sending this Witkoff special envoy all over the place, trying to come up with some type of resolution to the special military operations, the so-called Ukraine war, but they've not been able to do it. They do not want an outright military defeat of Ukraine in the war because they were pushing for Ukraine to become part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So they would have Russia, a whole series of border countries that are NATO countries against the Russian Federation. So they've used draconian sanctions, perhaps the most draconian sanctions in the history of the world. It has not worked at all. In fact, the economy in Russia has grown stronger since the beginning of the special military operations. Even those corporations which left during the early phase of these special military operations, like McDonald's, for example, the Russian government, even after it no longer was a socialist state, had agreements with these corporations that if they did leave, they would take control of all their infrastructure, but they'd have to be paid compensation for their abandonment of the country. So these firms are still operating inside of the Russian Federation, and BRICS is getting stronger. They're gaining more members, more interests. The population of the BRICS countries now constitute over one half of the population of the entire world. So they're very, very concerned, even though the Soviet Union no longer exists. The form of socialism that is practiced today in China is different than it was under Mao Zedong in the 1950s, 60s, and up until the mid-70s when Mao Zedong died, and you had the ascendancy of Deng Xiaoping under the three represents and all of that. So yes, they still fear them. Vladimir Putin is on a state visit to India, and it's been announced that they're going to give India as much oil as they want. The U.S. does not like that as well, even though they try to maintain India as a close ally.
But going back to Algeria, what can you say about Algeria's relations and ties with the Western proxy Gulf monarchs of West Asia, and what's been Algeria's response to a lot of the Western African Spring anti-French upheavals that's been happening in West Africa?
In terms of their foreign policy, is clearly, if not anti-French, they at least emphasize the sovereignty of Algeria, and they resent the distortion on the part of the successive French governments in regard to their role in colonial Algeria, the National Liberation War, and beyond that. In terms of their relations with the Gulf monarchies, I don't think it's a hostile relationship, but they do not accept their approach in terms of governance and also their alliance with the United States. And they are closer to Cuba, to China, and the Russian Federation as well. Now there was some problems.
And then
With,
you also mentioned that Algeria did not participate in the criminal invasion of Iraq in the 90s, the first
yeah,
what's often called the first Gulf War. So
yeah,
so that's interesting. And did they have good relations with the fallen with the fallen government of Muammar Gaddafi, and also good relations with the fallen Syrian Arab Republic?
yeah, yeah, they did. And they were secular, even under the Arab Ba'ath Socialist Party. They were not a religious party. They called for the unification of all the Arab-speaking states under socialism. Now, there was a split in 1966 between the Arab Ba'ath Socialist Party in Syria and the one in Iraq, which was a bitter conflict that was never really resolved, particularly under Saddam Hussein's government. But
Well,
yes,
that's because he was a groomed Western proxy who later got betrayed
yeah, exactly. He
by the
did.
Godfather. Whereas Syria, they did some awful things when it came to the Lebanese civil war, and they did and
Yeah,
under Hafiz Assad also did some awful things back during the reign of Yasser Arafat. But that being said, under Bashar al-Assad, they were a much more constructive actor when it came to Lebanese affairs, axis of resistance, respecting the Islamic Republic of Iran's sovereignty, and also respecting the sovereignty of whomever was, Palestinian leadership, whether it was Fatah or Hamas, and so forth like that. So,
exactly,
and,
exactly. So
and,
they do respect, the right of oppressed nations to self-determination and the right all the way up to the point of armed self-defense and armed warfare. And that's been brought out, of course, by their continuing support for the people of the Western Sahara.
and
They
the
have not
and
wavered.
the Algerian government never threw so they never threw Iraq under
No,
Saddam Hussein under the bus, and never threw Syria under the bus when
no.
the Western Gulf Israeli and Turkish actors
Mhm.
overthrew and sadly were successful in overturning the Syrian Arab Republic.
Yes, and also in Libya, in 2011, when the Arab League met and voted to support this no-fly zone fraud over Libya, which provided a rationale for the U.S., Britain, France, Turkey, and their allies to blanket bomb Libya during 2011. They did not. They voted against it, along with Syria. So they did not support it, and I think their position has proven correct, and they have preserved themselves as a nation state despite all of its problems. But they do not, at this point, have any serious threat to their national sovereignty by these groups that are supposed to be Islamists, but they're supported by U.S. And the other imperialist states, like the JNIM right now, which is fighting against the government in Mali, have been linked to Ukraine, which is armed by the United States. And that's why diplomatic relations were broken between Mali and one other state within the AES. And there's also problems associated with that group now in northern Nigeria. They have come in there. And it's interesting, they have made their presence in Nigeria at the same time that US imperialism is accusing the Nigerians of engaging in genocide against the Christian population in Nigeria, which is totally false
Yeah,
because the wars that are going on in northern Nigeria are a direct byproduct of British imperialism and U.S. Neocolonialism. And we discussed this in an episode earlier. And right now they're saying that this is the Trump administration is spreading these false rumors that Christians are being targeted for genocide inside of Nigeria. Even the head of the Catholic bishops in Nigeria released a statement earlier this week saying it was totally false what they were saying. They could use that in terms of the North and also in the Southeast, where you have a ongoing problem with secessionists that want to recreate a Biafran enclave composed of people from the Igbo nationality in the southeast of Nigeria. And in fact, the Nnamdi Kanu, the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra organization, was just sentenced to life in prison by the Nigerian courts. So the Igbos are heavily Catholic and Christian oriented. So they could try to use that struggle as the Zionists have used it in the past to try to create a renewed civil war in the southern part of Nigeria. And in the north, where the situation there is largely based on regional issues and outright criminal activity due to the breakdown of the administrative and military structures in the northern, several northern states in Nigeria. With the introduction of the JNIM, they could use that as an excuse for some type of U.S. or NATO-oriented intervention in northern Nigeria based upon falsehoods about the persecution and genocide being carried out against the Christian population there.
And it's just hilarious that the U.S. and its allies would do this to Nigeria, given that the current ruling party in Nigeria and even the Nigerian government before that under Goodluck Jonathan are both far right, pro-Western.
Exactly, capitalists. They don't care. What they care about is the oil, that rich, oil that is there in Nigeria, the natural gas that is there in Nigeria, its strategic location in West Africa. That is what they're really concerned about. So even though Bola Tinubu is willing, to compromise with the United States, they've even had some discussions in the last several weeks about security concerns in northern Nigeria. It doesn't matter. They could still overthrow his government and try to install a more pliant puppet regime in Nigeria. I think the All Progressives Congress administration there is concerned about a potential military coup. There's been a big shakeup of the top military leadership in Nigeria over the last several months. So none of these African countries can be considered stable politically and economically. What Trump is doing is going around, for example, Rwanda and the DRC. They were here yesterday, the presidents of both of those countries, Kagame and the president of Tshisekedi of the DRC, to sign yet another so-called peace accord between Rwanda and the DRC. The M23 people were not present, but fighting is still going on in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo and the northern Kivu, southern Kivu, and even in the Ituri province, which is on the border with Uganda. And there are other rebel groups as well who are not even involved in these discussions that are taking place there. So it's a sham, and Trump is trying to make it look like he's bringing peace to the world between Ukraine and Russia. He's talking about now intervening to bring about peace in Sudan between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces. And they're all behind all of these conflicts. They destabilized the government in Ukraine, overthrew it in 2014, empowering the right-wing Nazi elements of the right sector and the Banderas. These are people who fought with Hitler during World War II. These are the people who are the backbone of the military in Ukraine. Now they're trying to supposedly create peace between Rwanda and the DRC, when in fact they have systematically destabilized Congo for decades.
Exactly.
So it's a sham what he's saying,
But
and
but uh but
yeah,
and completely agree with you on that. But now, if
mhm.
but if we go back to Algeria, and this is actually a final question.
Okay,
Final
go
question
ahead.
on Algeria, is then the following. So I mean, yeah, so yeah, I agree with you. Long story short, we should never trust Western. All nations of the world should never trust Western imperialists, even if you're a right winger.
Yeah, even the Europeans. He's forced the Europeans to escalate their military expenditures. Look at all the social problems that are occurring now in the UK and other countries.
Yeah.
Higher unemployment. All of this. But anyway, go ahead. Back to Algeria.
Yes. So,
Yes.
so my final question then, when it comes to Algeria, is this: so, given all of that,
Mhm.
and given that the ruling National Liberation Front has pivoted more and more to the economic right for over 2 decades now in Algeria, is there a strong left wing movement and a left wing alternative opposition in politics to the ruling National Liberation Front? And with that, any final thoughts you want to share with us about Algeria and explain how whatever grievances and injustice and betrayals that have existed in Algeria, socialism, Marxism, Pan Africanist leftism, Pan Middle Easternist, West Asian leftism is the only way forward to advance decent livelihoods and the well being of the vast majority of the working class of Algeria.
Yes, there are left wing parties in Algeria, but they're not strong enough, as I see it, to mount a challenge to the military and those political forces that are still allied with the Algerian military. Recently, they had voted in favor at the United Nations Security Council to this new agreement for Palestine, and that has baffled some people because ostensibly the U.S. is supposed to be heading this new construct, which a colleague of mine, Dr. Ishmael Noor, who's Palestinian, says it's a attempt to recreate the British mandate over Palestine, which existed after World War One all the way up into the period
And Algeria
of World War Two.
and Algeria shamefully supported that sham of
Yes,
whatever thing,
and it's not clear exactly why they did it.
Which Russia
Now,
shamefully abstained from.
my colleague, who I just mentioned,
Yeah. Oh,
yes. Now, my
yeah. Go
colleague,
ahead,
who I
Obi.
just mentioned, said that it would have been difficult. Uh, he was saying, the Palestinian colleague I was just mentioning, he said it would have been difficult for Russia and China to vote against it, when in fact you had the Arab states that were involved in this whole project voting in favor of it. So that was his rationale for why Russia and China abstained, and perhaps why Algeria went along with it. But at any rate, I don't see this as being successful. What are they going to do to enforce this mandate? Are they going to allow the United States to have its troops come in? Are they going to still allow the Israeli Defense Forces to patrol Gaza? What are they going to do when they get fired on by the resistance movements, the Hamas, the Al Qassam brigades, the Palestine Islamic Jihad, which is the Al Quds Brigade, and others? It's about 9 or 10 different resistance movements that came together to fight against the IDF occupation after October 7th of 2023. So just as the British mandate was resisted during the 1930s by the original Al Qassam and all other efforts to subdue the Palestinians through successive attempts to invade the country in 1967, the 1956 war over the Suez Canal. You had the intifadas of the late 1980s, of the 1990s, and the Al Aqsa flood
And
of
and, and,
2 years ago. They have not been able to suppress the Palestinian resistance.
and with that being said, do you think that there's and with that being said, do you think that in spite of the many betrayals of the ruling party in Algeria, that there will be someday, if the left wing opposition alternative plays its cards right, they will advance true socialism and pan Africanist leftism, pan Arabism, pan Middle Easternist leftist politics, and so forth. Domestically, uh, for the working class of Algeria.
I think most definitely because the historical memory of the massacres of May 1945 in Sétif in Guelma, the Declaration of 1954, which launched the Algerian National Liberation Front, the victories of the Algerian National Liberation Front, and its anti-imperialist legacy is still very much a part of the collective consciousness of the Algerian people, whether it's a rectification within inside the FLN and allied groups, or a broader alliance with other left-wing forces inside of Algeria. I think it's inevitable that they'll move in that direction. I just wanted to mention that there are two films that everybody should see if they haven't seen it. The Battle of Algiers, which was released in 1966 by Gillo Pontecorvo. He's an Italian socialist realist filmmaker. And then a more recent one that came out in 1975 called Chronicles of the Years of Fire that was done by Mohammed Lakhtiar Hamina. Now, Chronicles of the Years of Fire actually screened in Detroit at the Arab American Museum just this past Wednesday. I wanted to see the film on a big screen, but the snow was so bad that night. On my way out there, it's shown in Dearborn, which is just to the west of the city. It's right on the border with Detroit to the west suburb. I was on my way out there and I said, no, I better turn around. I don't want to, because the cold weather was just absolutely freezing, and the grounds were freezing. So I don't know if they still show the film or not, but you can see this film on YouTube. So people who want to see the Battle of Algiers by Pontecorvo from 1966 and the Chronicles of the Years of Fire by Mohammed Lakhtiar Hamina can also see that on YouTube as well. Both films are very long. They're like 3 hours long, both of them, but they're very worth, and they're both historical fiction. But the Battle of Algiers, the way it was shot in black and white, it looks like a documentary film. Yeah, and that film was suppressed for many, many years, and but now it's available on Turner Classic Movies. You can see it on YouTube. It was quite interesting. In 1991, the Pentagon ordered their soldiers, particularly the officers, to watch the film, and I was thinking, why would they do that? Because what it showed was that even though the entire military leadership in the capital was wiped out around 1956, 58. They still lost. The French still lost. They used other means. The war in the countryside, usage of general strikes, which is shown in the Battle of Algiers, and it still collapsed. And so it's kind of bizarre that they would tell their soldiers to watch that film.
Knowing the U.S., France, Britain, Canada, I'm pretty sure they're saying infiltrate these groups and then replicate their tactics in order to discredit them, which they are known for doing. So
exactly. But those are two great films, and we'll see what happens. But Algeria today, they have about 47 million people. It's since the partition of Sudan in 2011, which was the largest geographic nation state in Africa. Today, Algeria is the largest geographic nation state on the continent, and that's the 10th largest populated country on the African continent. So it's still a formidable, powerful force in terms of energy resources, geographic positioning, as well as its population.
And on top of that, before I close, on top of
Mm-hmm.
that, it's quite remarkable that despite the many epic betrayals of the National Liberation Front, which has the secularism but lacks the economic leftism and so forth. France Fanon would definitely be very disappointed in what became of Algeria after its independence. Uh, although there is, although there still is a sizable, Islamist extreme Sunni Takfiri movement, many, many people in Algeria, particularly the young people, are not attracted to that reactionary fake populism. They do want leftism. They do want secular leftism. So there might be there might be hope for Algeria, which will be a hope for all of humanity if they're able to advance themselves.
Yeah, the youth, even in Morocco, we talked about last week, have been demonstrating for a better life. But hopefully they'll move towards the left and not move towards more of a neoliberal outlook, thinking that if they follow, the patterns of Western Europe, the UK, and North America, that this will somehow be a better life. They need to look at those people, the migrants who have fled, the northern coast of Africa, across the Mediterranean, and the conditions they're living in southern, central, and Europe, and also in the UK. A lot of people are living under very, very horrendous circumstances, high unemployment, poverty, even homelessness, and repression, by these security forces. And a lot of these right-wing parties have arisen due to these migration influxes. Their whole political and programmatic campaign is based on the removal of migrants, particularly from Africa and Asia. Look at the AFD in Germany, which I was glad to see a backlash against them among German youth when they were going to establish some type of youth group for the alternatives of Deutschland. Similar situations are occurring in the Netherlands, in France with the National Rally, in the UK with Reform UK, and even other parties to the right, supposedly of Reform UK. So if they look at this and judge it and analyze it, the West is definitely not a paradise for Africans and Asian people to seek refuge. By no means is it. And the people that are dying in the Mediterranean shows that it's a horrendous process.
And I think they only have to ask some of their, some of their friends who live in the Bonneloos and others who have been
Mm-hmm.
who have been Belgians, who have been Dutch, or who have been German, or who have been French most of their lives and are still facing
Mm-hmm.
xenophobia and are still being told to go back to their country and are still being told you are insufficiently not assimilating well and whatnot. So
Yeah, because we've seen, rebellions even in certain parts of Belgium and in Sweden as well, years ago. So the potential there is still great, for right-wing resurgence, and which would even be more dangerous for all people, working class and poor people, even of European descent themselves.
well, that's a perfect place to end. Well, we were joined on this edition of One Plus One, our All Things Africa edition, learning about Algeria with our always brilliant returning champion, the historian, journalist, Pan Africanist, leftist, and anti imperialist, and Friends All People Power movement, Abayomi Azikiwe of Pan African Newswire and Black Agenda Reports. Subscribe to both outlets and donate generously to them. And please, folks, share widely all of One Plus One's content. Donate generously to us if you can. And the next country we'll be exploring is the long awaited and often talked about Tunisia. Do join us next week for that as our exploration of North Africa and the rest of the continent continues. Have a great weekend, folks. All my best. Good night and good luck. And forgot to mention this last week. Rest in peace to the following. Rest in peace to Jimmy Cliff, And Jamil Al Amin, the freedom fighter formerly known as H. Rat Brown, and a belated rest in peace and rest in power to Asada Shakur. And thank you, gracias very much to Cuba for keeping her safe all of these years. All my best, folks.
All right.